kitchensandbaths.net.
Jason Rosenbaum filling in for Joe Manis at the Beacon. STLbeacon.org is where we read Jason, where we read Joe Manis, who is doing such great work. So you guys take a couple of weeks off. Jason, thanks for filling in for Joe Manis.
It's great to be on the show. I'm always happy to fill in for Joe when she's on vacation.
You betcha. Big news this week. I guess it's not that big of a news, maybe, but Costner signaling that he's going to run for governor, and Clint Zweifel sort of letting him lead the way.
Well, when Chris Costner switched parties in 2007, I think that could qualify as a shocker in the world of Missouri politics. But this news that Costner is planning to run for governor in 2016 is not all that surprising. And in some respects, Zweifel dropping out this early isn't that surprising either. Costner already in 2013, which is not obviously an election year, has already raised around $285,000 in donations at $5,000 or more. Zweifel hasn't even come close to that amount, and I think that Zweifel is bowing out early so that there's no will he or won't he as he goes through to the next election cycle and maybe wants to run for something else, because Zweifel can't run for re-election as treasurer. There are term limits for that office, and it basically gives a freer path for Costner to pursue the Democratic nomination to succeed Jay Nixon.
There's no question that Chris Costner has the name recognition, and he has the credentials, being the Attorney General for the last number of years, working his way up through the system. Who on the Republican side might? I mean, it seems like there's no heir apparent. They don't have anybody in waiting, and it seems like the lieutenant governor sort of missed his window.
I think that's a really good question, and there's not really an obvious choice, because when you look at the Republican Party in Missouri, especially in the legislature, there's a lot of Republican elected officials out there, but there's no obvious choice at this point in time. And obviously it's still early. This is April 2013. We're talking about a 2016 race, but a lot of these bigger races like governor materialized well beforehand. And you know, some people who have been thrown around as possibilities, former House Speaker Catherine Hanaway told Joe Manis a couple months ago that she was thinking about either running for governor or attorney general. State Auditor Tom Schweik is a natural possibility if he wins re-election next year. I even heard the name Blaine Luetkemeyer of St. Elizabeth thrown around as well. And there's also, you know, the leaders of the House and Senate, Tim Jones of Eureka, the Speaker of the House, Tom Dempsey of St. Charles, also possibilities. And, you know, even though Lieutenant Governor Kinder was expected to run last year and he bowed out for many reasons, he did win re-election by his largest margin yet. And if he was thinking about doing that in 2016, I mean, he has run statewide a few times and has been tested under fire, so to speak. So I wouldn't count him out as a possibility either.
Yeah. What are you hearing, Jason, about the Medicaid expansion as it works its way through the House?
Well, it's, you know, I think when Joe and I were talking about this issue when Governor Nixon announced his support for it, we always figured it would be a tough legislative road, mainly because the Republicans have supermajorities in the House and the Senate. And the big obstacle, even if the House changed their mind, was going to be the Senate, because, as I'm sure you know, the Senate is a place where bills with even great consensus can get bogged down by a few people. And what happened this week was the governor went to talk with the Senate GOP caucus, and from talking with John Lamping of Ladue, he said that after that meeting, their position has really not changed. They have no intention of passing anything this year. He told me that they're looking to next year to find a resolution on the issue, and you know, unless they find some consensus in later this year and call a special session, things aren't looking very optimistic on that front.
Seems like the Senate is where everything goes to die, not just Medicaid expansion, but they've had a hard time over the last number of years getting anything through the Senate.
Well, it really has a lot to do, and I don't want to get too arcane here, but the filibuster is still a really powerful tool in the Senate. You know, there was talk in Washington about how they want senators there to stand up and talk as opposed to going through procedural morass. But in the Missouri Senate, they do actually stand up and talk. And if you get somebody who can get 3 or 4 or 5 people to indefinitely talk something to death, I mean, that's a hugely powerful weapon, because they could just rotate indefinitely until they either prompt changes that are untenable to the House or just they give up on things. And I think unless there is a really big compromise on the Medicaid expansion front, I kind of foresee that would be what would happen. And there's no even guarantee that there's 18 votes to do either a full expansion like Nixon wants up to 138% of the federal poverty level, or an alternative that's being floated in the House. So it really is, it might seem structurally arcane, but I mean, stuff like this does matter when you want to get stuff passed.
Jason Rosenbaum with us from the Beacon, filling in for Joe Manis. So I was talking to some people on the inside yesterday, and as you said, they said Medicare expansion dead for this year. How much does that hurt us going forward in terms of money from the federal government?
From talking with the Missouri Hospital Association spokesperson, what it would mean if they didn't get it this year is they would lose that first year of 100% reimbursement. They could come back in 2014 and they could get 2 years if they agree to something if under the terms of whatever the federal government wants. And who knows, maybe they could get a waiver from the federal government to do 3 years, but I'm not sure if that's written into the law. I would have to study that more. That would probably be the biggest impact from what I've heard from talking with people. And I think that a lot of hospitals are concerned that when the Medicaid expansion doesn't happen and some of the reimbursements go down for uncompensated care, rural hospitals in particular are going to feel the pinch. My colleague Robert Joyner wrote a story to that effect this week about the impact of such a move in southern Missouri. And, you know, there are some legislators like Rob Schaaf of St. Joseph who dispute that such a move would be that consequential. He's a longtime adversary of the hospital industry, but that's sort of what the hospitals are putting forth. And that's why a lot of them have come out strongly for this expansion, and many chambers of commerce have too.
Right. Jason Rosenbaum, our guest, I think your point, and this is important for people to know, even if Missouri doesn't expand their Medicaid through this Obamacare, the federal government is going to start to change the way they reimburse for ongoing care. So they're not going to get as much reimbursement money as they've gotten in the past. So even if they don't expand, they're going to lose some federal money.
Yeah, I mean, that's the trade-off. The trade-off of expanding Medicaid and getting an enhanced federal match is that they reduce the amount of payments to providers and hospitals, because if they didn't, then, you know, the hospitals would essentially be getting reimbursed more than
right.
more than
right.
They probably should be.
So even it's our choice as a state to accept the federal funds. However, regardless, they're going to start taking our federal funds away from us from the other column.
I mean, that's the status quo right now. And from talking with John Lamping, he suggested that the hospital associations and the governor go to the federal government, or go to Congress for that matter, and try to get something amended or passed to where they would at least delay that until they make some sort of decision. Whether that type of advocacy could actually be effective remains to be seen, especially since there is a Democratic Senate and a Republican House and a Democratic president. With that sort of configuration, I'm not really quite sure that
right.
type of solution would be completely practical. But if they don't expand Medicaid in Missouri, I wouldn't be that surprised if that's the route that they take just because of the consequences of not taking the expansion.
Yeah, sounds like the time for a negotiation was during the time they were negotiating this bill, not 4 years after it has been implemented, but that's beside the point. Jason Rosenbaum, we're going to have to leave it there. STL Beacon, stlbeacon.org is where we find you, Jason. Jason, thanks for checking in. Have a good day.
You too, McGraw.
847 here on the Big 550 KTRS.
Have you been to a Creve Coeur camera lately? Hi, this is Stephen Weiss, the owner of Creve Coeur Camera.